The salvage scanner beeped twice, indicating another empty corridor ahead. David Reed wiped sweat from his forehead and adjusted the light on his helmet. 3 weeks he had been picking through this abandoned research facility, and so far he had found nothing but broken equipment and dust. His boots crunched on debris as he walked deeper into the facility. The place had been evacuated months ago after some kind of accident. Nobody bothered to explain what happened to salvage workers like him. They just sent him coordinates and expected him to strip anything valuable from the wreckage. David didn't mind the solitude. After years of disappointing everyone who expected something from him, working alone felt easier. His father wanted him to finish veterinary school. His professors wanted him to apply himself. His ex-girlfriend wanted him to have ambition. Now he floated through dead stations, cataloging broken machines, and nobody expected anything at all. The corridor ended at a collapsed section. Support beams had fallen across the doorway, creating a tangled mess of metal and concrete. David was about to turn back when he heard something. A small sound, almost like a bird chirping. He froze and listened. There it was again. Definitely alive. Definitely trapped. Vera, are you picking up any life signs? David asked his ship's artificial intelligence through his helmet comm. Negative. Sensors show no biological activity in your vicinity. The AI responded in her flat, emotionless voice. But David heard it clearly now. 2 distinct sounds taking turns, almost like they were calling to each other. He approached the collapsed doorway and shined his light through the gaps in the debris. 2 pairs of eyes reflected back at him. Small eyes, frightened eyes. Well, that's new, David muttered. He set down his equipment pack and started examining the debris pile. Moving the wrong beam could bring the whole mess down. He had to be careful. The chirping grew more urgent. Whatever was trapped inside knew he was there. David worked slowly, testing each piece before moving it. His hands remembered skills from years ago, from back when he actually cared about helping living things. He had been good at it once. Before the debt, before the dropout, before the long line of bad decisions that led him to salvaging garbage in space. 20 minutes later, he had created a narrow opening. He squeezed through, his suit scraping against jagged metal. The room beyond was dark except for his helmet light. It had been some kind of laboratory. Broken glass and equipment littered the floor. In the corner, huddled against the wall, were 2 small creatures. They were unlike anything David had seen before. Roughly the size of house cats, covered in scales that shimmered when his light hit them. They had 4 legs, long tails, and delicate wings folded against their backs. Their heads were reptilian, but their eyes held something that looked almost human. Intelligence, fear, hope. Both creatures were injured. One had a gash along its side. The other's wing was bent at an odd angle. They had been trapped here for who knows how long, surrounded by broken glass and no food. "Hey there," David said softly, keeping his voice calm. "You guys look like you've had a rough time." The creatures pressed against each other, watching him. They didn't run. Maybe they were too weak. Maybe they somehow understood he wanted to help. David slowly removed his equipment pack and pulled out his emergency medical kit. It was designed for humans, but some basics worked across species. Antiseptic, bandages, pain medication. "I'm going to come closer now," he said, moving inch by inch. "I know I look weird in this suit, but I promise I'm not going to hurt you." His veterinary training kicked in like muscle memory. Approach slowly. Keep movements predictable. Let them see your hands. He knelt down 3 feet away from them and opened the medical kit where they could watch. The creature with the gashed side made a soft sound, not quite a chirp. More like a question. "Yeah, I know it hurts," David said. He pulled out antiseptic spray and showed it to them. "This is going to help. Might sting a little." He couldn't explain why he was talking to them. They obviously didn't understand English. But something in their eyes made him feel like they were listening anyway. David spent the next hour treating their injuries as best he could. The creatures remained still, almost unnaturally calm, as if they understood he was trying to help. When he wrapped the bandage around the gash side, the injured one leaned into his touch. "You're very trusting for wild animals," David observed. "Either you're incredibly smart or incredibly desperate." Once their wounds were dressed, David faced a decision. Protocol said he should report the discovery and wait for a xenobiology team. That could take days. These creatures looked half-starved. They might not survive days. His ship was 10 minutes away. He had supplies. temperature controls, a cargo bay that could easily hold 2 small creatures. David looked at his scanner, still showing no life signs, which meant these things didn't register on standard equipment, which meant if he left and came back he might never find them again. Vera, prepare the cargo bay for passengers, David said into his comm. Small, warm-blooded, and injured. That is not standard protocol, Vera responded. Yeah, well, add it to my list of questionable decisions. David carefully scooped up both creatures. They weighed almost nothing. He could feel their hearts beating fast against his arms. Getting back through the debris was harder while carrying them, but David managed. The creatures stayed quiet, pressed against his chest. When he emerged into the corridor, they made soft sounds that might have been relief. The walk back to his ship felt longer than usual. David kept checking to make sure they were still breathing. Their scales felt warm through his gloves. Whatever they were, they definitely weren't suited for cold, abandoned stations. His ship, a beat-up salvage vessel called the Wayward, waited where he had docked it. David carried the creatures aboard and into the cargo bay. He had converted part of it into a workshop, but there was plenty of room. He set them down gently on a padded tarp and went to gather supplies. Food was the first problem. He had no idea what they ate. David started with water and small pieces of protein rations. The creatures sniffed everything carefully before eating. They were hungry enough to try anything. While they ate, David rigged up a heated lamp using spare parts. The creatures immediately moved toward the warmth. Their scales seemed to brighten under the heat. They looked less gray, more iridescent. Blues and greens and purples shifting across their scales. You're actually kind of beautiful, David said. What are you? He took images with his scanner and ran them through every biological database he could access. Nothing matched. Not even close. These creatures weren't on record anywhere, which was strange. Humanity had cataloged thousands of species across hundreds of worlds. Vera, any matches? He asked. Negative. The creatures are not in any known database. Energy readings are unusual. Should I alert authorities? David watched the 2 creatures curl up together under the heat lamp. The injured one rested its head on its companion. They looked comfortable. Safe. For the first time since he found them, they didn't look afraid. Not yet, David said. Let me think about it. 3 days passed. David postponed his return to the salvage depot, claiming equipment malfunctions. He spent his time caring for the creatures. Their wounds healed faster than he expected. They started exploring the cargo bay, chirping to each other, playing gentle games of chase. They were smart. Incredibly smart. They figured out how to open storage containers. They learned which buttons on the wall panels did what. They even seemed to understand when David spoke to them, tilting their heads as if processing his words. David started calling them Ash and Smoke after their gray scales. They responded to the names coming when called. Ash was the bolder one, always investigating new things. Smoke was more cautious, always checking if something was safe before approaching. On the 3rd night, David was running diagnostics on his ship when Vera's voice cut through the silence. Warning. Multiple vessels approaching. Dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds. David rushed to the cockpit. His view screen lit up with proximity alerts. Ships, big ones, surrounding his position. Vera, identify those vessels. Classification. Draconis Imperium warships, 12 in total. They are hailing us, David's mouth went dry. The Draconis. He had heard of them. Everyone had. A powerful species that controlled dozens of systems. Humanoid but massive, with scales and the ability to transform into something even larger. Humanity had encountered them exactly twice in diplomatic settings, both times carefully maintaining respectful distance. Put them through, David said. The view screen crackled. A face appeared. Not human, scaled with golden eyes and sharp features, beautiful and terrifying at once. Human vessel, this is General Soren of the Draconis Imperium. The voice was female, speaking English with a strange accent. You have something that belongs to us. Return the royal offspring immediately and your death will be swift. Resist and it will be slow. David looked back toward the cargo bay where Ash and Smoke were probably sleeping under their heat lamp. Royal offspring. Oh no, David whispered. What did I get myself into? David's hands shook as he stared at the view screen. 12 warships surrounded his tiny salvage vessel. Any one of them could destroy the Wayward with a single shot. I found them injured, David said, trying to keep his voice steady. In an abandoned research facility. I was helping them. General Soren's golden eyes narrowed. You expect me to believe a human randomly discovered the missing heirs to the Draconis throne? Convenient. I'm a salvage worker. I pick through dead stations for broken equipment. That's all I do. David pulled up his employment records on a side screen. Look, here's my assignment. Here's my route. I didn't know what they were. Ignorance is not innocence. Soren's image shifted as she stood. Even through the screen, David could tell she was huge. Prepare to be boarded. If the hatchlings are harmed in any way, you will beg for death before I grant it. The transmission cut off. David sat frozen for a moment, then rushed to the cargo bay. Ash and Smoke were awake, standing alert. Their scales had shifted darker, and they were making low growling sounds. Somehow they knew something was wrong. It's okay, David said, though it very much was not okay. Some people are coming. I think they're here for you. Ash chirped and moved behind David's legs. Smoke did the same. Both hatchlings pressed against him, trembling. Vera, open the docking port, David said quietly. No point in resisting. The ship shuddered as something large clamped onto the hull. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors. David stood in the cargo bay, the hatchlings behind him, and waited. General Soren entered first. She had to duck through the doorway. In person, she was even more imposing. 12 feet tall, covered in deep red scales that looked like armor. Her face was angular and sharp, with horns curving back from her head. She wore black military gear that somehow made her look more dangerous, not less. 4 guards followed her, all nearly as large, all armed with weapons David didn't recognize. Soren's eyes locked onto the hatchlings. Her expression changed, softening for just a moment. Relief. Then her gaze hardened again as she looked at David. Step away from them, she ordered. They're scared, David said. Can you maybe not point weapons at them? One of the guards moved forward. You do not give orders here, human. Ash made a high-pitched sound and pressed closer to David. Smoke wrapped its tail around David's leg. Soren raised a hand, stopping her guard. She studied the scene carefully. Her eyes moved from David to the hatchlings, to the makeshift habitat he had built. The heat lamp, the food dishes, the soft bedding, the carefully organized medical supplies. Show me their injuries, Soren said. David knelt down slowly. Ash, can you let the general see your side? The hatchling hesitated, then moved forward enough for Soren to see the bandaged wound. Soren's expression darkened. And the other? Smoke's wing was damaged. It's healing well, but it needs to stay wrapped for another few days. Soren knelt, which brought her head level with David's. Up close, her scales had patterns like fire. Her eyes were intense, searching. These are the royal offspring of King Aldrich, she said quietly. They were stolen 6 weeks ago by enemies of the throne. We have been searching desperately. Royal hatchlings rarely survive without the flame warmth of their parents. David felt his stomach drop. 6 weeks. These tiny creatures had been away from their family for 6 weeks. Who took them? He asked. That is not your concern. Soren stood and gestured to her guards. Take the hatchlings, carefully. A guard approached. Both Ash and Smoke made distressed sounds and tried to burrow behind David. The guard reached for them anyway. Smoke opened its small mouth and a puff of flame shot out, no bigger than a candle flame, but enough to make the guard pull back. They've imprinted on the human, another guard said. Surprise in his voice. Soren went very still. What? Look at them. They're displaying classic imprint behavior. They see him as their guardian. Soren stared at David with an expression he couldn't read. Shock maybe, or anger? Possibly both. That's impossible. They've only been with him for days, not weeks. Trauma accelerates the process, the first guard said. They were alone, frightened, and he was the first to show them care. They've bonded. Can't you just, I don't know, unbond them? David asked. Every Draconis in the room looked at him like he had said something offensive. Imprinting is sacred, Soren said coldly. It cannot be broken. A hatchling imprints on their primary caregiver within the first months of life. That bond shapes their entire development. To force separation would psychologically damage them, possibly permanently. David processed this information slowly. So what does that mean? It means, human, that you are now bound by Draconis law as their guardian until they reach maturity. How long is that? 25 of your Earth years. The cargo bay seemed to tilt. 25 years? David couldn't even commit to a gym membership. He had debts, a job, a life that was already a mess without adding alien children to it. I can't do that, David said. I have responsibilities. I need to work. I can't just disappear for 25 years. You should have considered that before interfering. Soren's voice was hard again. You will come with us to the Draconis homeworld. King Aldrich will decide your fate. Until then, you remain responsible for the hatchlings' care. And if I refuse, Soren stepped closer, then I will take you by force. The king has lost his mate and thought he had lost his children as well. He is not in a forgiving mood. Be grateful that I'm giving you a choice between walking onto my ship or being dragged. David looked down at Ash and Smoke. They stared up at him with those intelligent eyes, trusting him completely. He thought about just 3 days ago, when his biggest problem was cataloging broken equipment. Life had been simple, lonely but simple. If I come with you, they'll be okay, David asked. You won't separate us? I cannot promise what the king will decide. But yes, for now you will remain together. David took a deep breath. Then I guess I'm coming with you, Soren nodded. Wise choice. Gather whatever you need. We leave immediately. David packed quickly. Clothes, his personal tablet, some books. Vera would be fine in standby mode. The company would eventually come looking for their ship, find it intact, and probably just reassign him as missing. Nobody would care enough to investigate further. As he packed, Ash and Smoke followed him around the ship, chirping softly. They seemed to sense something big was happening. It's okay, David told them. We're going to go meet your father. I bet he's really missed you. The transfer to Soren's flagship took an hour. The Draconis ship was massive. Everything was scaled for beings twice David's size. The corridors were wide enough to drive a car through. The ceilings were so high they disappeared into shadow. David was given quarters that had been hastily adjusted for a human. They lowered the temperature, brought in smaller furniture, and installed a bed that didn't require a ladder to climb. The hatchling stayed with him, refusing to leave his side. A young guard named Talia brought food. She was smaller than the others, maybe only 9 feet tall, with green scales and curious eyes. You are the human who saved them? She asked. I'm the human who accidentally got involved in something way over his head. David corrected. Talia smiled, showing sharp teeth. You are braver than you appear. Most humans would have fled at the sight of General Soren. I considered it, but I'm not good at running away. More of a freeze and panic type. The hatchlings like you. That is rare. Royal Draconis are usually wary of other species. David watched Ash and Smoke exploring his new quarters. They seemed fascinated by everything. They're just kids. All kids need is someone to care about them. Not all humans would see it that way. Talia set down a tray of food. Most view us as dangerous, violent. We have a reputation. Are you? Dangerous, I mean. Very. But that does not mean we are cruel. Talia headed for the door, then paused. The journey to our homeworld takes 5 days. Use that time to learn what you can about us. The king will have many questions, and his grief makes him unpredictable. After she left, David sat on the bed. Ash and Smoke climbed up beside him, curling into warm balls against his legs. They were already asleep, trusting him completely. What did I get us into? David whispered to the empty room. Outside his window, stars streaked past as the massive ship jumped to hyperspace. Somewhere ahead was a world of dragons, a grieving king, and a future David couldn't even begin to imagine. He had just wanted to help 2 injured creatures. Now his entire life had changed course, pulled into the orbit of an alien empire like gravity around a black hole. There was no going back, only forward into whatever came next. Ash mumbled something in his sleep. It almost sounded like a word, though David couldn't understand it. He gently petted the hatchling's head and Ash settled deeper into sleep. 5 days until they reached the Draconis homeworld. 5 days to prepare for meeting a king who had every reason to hate him. David didn't sleep that night. He spent it reading everything he could find about Draconis culture, law, and history. If he was going to survive this, he needed to understand the world he was being pulled into. The hatchlings slept peacefully beside him, their scales glowing faintly in the dark. Whatever happened next, at least they were safe. That had to count for something. The planet appeared in the viewport like a jewel on fire, Piraxis. The Draconis homeworld was covered in mountain ranges that glowed with volcanic activity. Cities clung to the peaks, connected by bridges that spanned impossible distances. Dragons flew through the air, their massive forms moving between the structures with grace that seemed to defy physics. David pressed his face against the window, unable to look away. In 5 days aboard the ship, he had learned much about the Draconis, ancient species, warriors by tradition, with codes of honor that were complex and absolute. They lived for centuries. They valued strength, loyalty, and family above all else. What he hadn't learned was how to not feel terrified. Approaching the royal palace, Vera's voice announced through the room's speakers. Soren had allowed his AI to interface with the ship. Ash and smoke pressed against David's legs, sensing his tension. Over the past 5 days, they had grown noticeably. Now the size of medium dogs, their scales brighter, their movement stronger. They understood more words each day. This morning, Smoke had clearly said David when trying to get his attention. Talia arrived to escort them to the landing bay. She had visited each day, answering David's endless questions about Draconis culture. She was patient in a way that surprised him. Most of the other crew members avoided him entirely. "Remember what I told you," Talia said as they walked the wide corridors. "Do not look the king directly in the eyes unless he addresses you first. Do not speak unless spoken to. Show respect, but do not grovel. Draconis despise weakness but appreciate courage. So basically, don't mess up in any way," David said. "Exactly." The landing bay opened onto a platform carved from volcanic rock. Heat hit David immediately, even through his protective suit. Soren had provided him with gear designed to withstand temperatures that would kill most humans. Outside, the air shimmered at over 140 degrees. A formation of guards waited, all in ceremonial armor that gleamed red and gold. Beyond them rose the royal palace, a massive structure built into the side of a volcano. It looked like something from a fantasy story, all towers and bridges and flames dancing in controlled channels. "Stay close," Soren ordered. She had been all business during the journey, barely speaking to David except to issue instructions. They walked across the platform. David carried Ash in his arms because the stone was too hot for the hatchling's feet. Smoke walked beside him, staying in David's shadow. Both hatchlings were quiet, their scales darkening with stress. The palace entrance was a doorway 30 feet high. Inside, the temperature was slightly cooler but still uncomfortable. David's suit kept him from cooking, but sweat poured down his face. Everything was scaled for giants. The corridors could fit 3 elephants walking side by side. The ceilings disappeared into shadow above. They passed Draconis in various states. Some in humanoid form like Soren walking on 2 legs, others in partial transformation, with wings and tails but still upright. A few in full dragon form, massive and terrifying, lounging in alcoves designed for their size. All of them stopped to stare at David. A human, here in the royal palace, carrying royal hatchlings. The whispers followed him like smoke. The throne room doors were carved with scenes of dragons in battle. 2 guards pushed them open, and David's breath caught in his throat. The chamber was enormous. Pillars of carved stone supported a ceiling so high it felt like standing outdoors. Channels of lava ran along the walls, providing light and heat. At the far end, elevated on a platform of black stone, sat a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian. On that throne sat King Aldrich. Even sitting, the king was huge. 18 feet tall, his scales black as midnight with veins of gold running through them like lightning. His horns curved back from his head, polished to mirror brightness. His eyes were pure gold, glowing with an inner fire. He wore minimal armor, just enough to denote rank. Everything about him radiated power and barely contained rage. The court surrounded him. Dozens of Draconis nobles all watching as Soren led David forward. The silence was absolute. Soren stopped 50 feet from the throne and bowed deeply. "My king, I have returned with your heirs." Aldrich's gaze moved to the hatchlings. For just a moment his expression cracked. Pain and relief crossed his face. Then the mask returned, hard as stone. "Approach," Aldrich commanded. His voice was deep, resonating through the chamber like thunder. David's legs felt weak, but he walked forward. Ash trembled in his arms. Smoke pressed against his leg with each step. 20 feet from the throne, David stopped and attempted an awkward bow. It was hard while holding Ash, probably disrespectful. He was already messing up. "You are human," Aldrich stated. "Yes, Your Majesty. My children were stolen by enemies of this throne. Now a human presents them to me. Explain." David swallowed hard. He told the story as simply as he could. The abandoned station. The sounds he heard. Finding them trapped and injured. Treating their wounds. His discovery that they were more than simple creatures when the warships arrived. Aldrich listened without expression. The court around him murmured at various points. David heard words he didn't understand, but the tone was clear. Suspicion, doubt, anger. When David finished, silence filled the chamber again. "You expect me to believe this was chance?" Aldrich said. "That you, a human, accidentally discovered my heirs after 6 weeks of searching by the finest trackers in my empire? I know how it sounds, but it's true. I didn't even know what they were. I just saw 2 injured animals and wanted to help." "Animals?" Aldrich's voice went cold. "You refer to the royal heirs as animals. I didn't know. I thought they were some kind of reptile. Maybe someone's escaped pets. I'm not a xenobiologist. I'm just a salvage worker who picks through trash." A noble from the court stepped forward. He was massive even for a draconis with dark purple scales. "This human lies, my king. Clearly he was involved in the kidnapping. He seeks reward or ransom." David felt panic rising. "I don't want anything. I just wanted them to be safe." "Then why not report your find immediately?" the noble demanded. "Why keep them hidden? They were injured, scared. I thought if I called authorities it would take days for someone to arrive. They might not survive days, so I did what I could with what I had." "Convenient excuse," another noble said. Aldrich raised a hand and the court fell silent. He stood and the movement was like watching a mountain rise. He descended from the platform, each step deliberate. The king approached until he towered over David, blocking out everything else. "Look at me, human," Aldrich commanded. David raised his eyes, met that golden gaze. The king's eyes were fire and fury and grief so deep it seemed bottomless. This was a being who had lost everything and held himself together through sheer will. "My mate was killed by the same faction that took my children," Aldrich said softly, and somehow that soft voice was more terrifying than shouting. "For 6 weeks I believed I had lost them as well. Do you understand what that means? Can your short-lived species even comprehend that depth of loss?" "I lost my mother when I was 8, David said quietly. "My father was there, but he wasn't really there anymore. Grief took him somewhere I couldn't reach. So I do understand at least a little what it means to lose someone and not get them back." Aldrich stared at him for a long moment. Then the king knelt, bringing his head level with David's. Up close, his scales had patterns like galaxies. "Show me their wounds," Aldrich said. David gently set Ash down and unwrapped the bandage on the hatchling's side. The wound was healing well, already mostly closed. Aldrich touched his child with one clawed finger, so careful despite his size. "And the other?" David showed Smoke's wing. Aldrich examined it closely, then looked at the makeshift splint David had fashioned. "This is crude," Aldrich said. "Yes. I did the best I could with what I had. You kept them warm. They seemed cold-blooded. I figured heat would help. You fed them. Of course, they were starving. You named them." David hesitated. "I didn't know their real names. Ash and Smoke just seemed to fit. They answered to it." Aldrich was quiet for a long time. He stood, turned, and walked back to his throne. Every eye in the chamber watched. The tension was thick enough to cut. "General Soren," Aldrich said, "what is your assessment?" Soren stepped forward. "The humans' ship logs support his story. The hatchlings show signs of imprinting on him. They refused to leave his side. When my guards approached, they defended him. In my judgment, he speaks truth." Another long silence. Aldrich sat on his throne, steepled his fingers, and studied David with those burning eyes. "You have created a problem, human," Aldrich finally said. "Draconis law is clear. Hatchlings imprint on their primary caregiver. That bond is sacred and cannot be broken without psychological damage. Yet you are an outsider, an alien. Allowing you to raise the royal heirs is unthinkable. I didn't mean to cause a problem. I just wanted to help. Yet here we are." Aldrich leaned forward. "Tell me, David Reed of Earth, what do you want as payment for saving my children?" David thought about his debts. His dead-end job, the life he had left behind. He thought about the past 5 days, caring for Ash and Smoke, watching them grow stronger and happier. "I don't want payment," David said. "I didn't do it for reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because they needed help and I could give it. That's all." The court erupted in whispers. Aldrich held up a hand for silence. "You refuse payment?" "Yes. Why?" "Because asking for payment would make it a transaction. It wasn't. It was just helping someone who needed it. That's not something you charge for." Aldrich studied him for another long moment. Then, for the first time, something that might have been respect flickered in those golden eyes. "You are either the noblest fool I have ever met, or the most clever manipulator," Aldrich said. "Time will reveal which. Until then, I make this judgment. You will remain on Paraxis as guardian to my heirs. You will fulfill the imprint bond until they reach maturity. But you will do so as a member of this household, with all the protection and resources that entails. You will also submit to observation, to prove you are who you claim. This is my decree." David felt the weight of every eye in the room. He had just been bound to this world, to these people, for the next 25 years. His old life was gone. Everything had changed in the span of a heartbeat. But when he looked down at Ash and Smoke, saw them looking up at him with trust and affection, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. "I accept," David said. "Then it is done." Aldrich gestured to Soren. "See him settled. We will speak more tomorrow." As Soren led him from the throne room, David heard the court burst into excited conversation. He had just become the most interesting gossip in the Draconis Empire. A human raising the royal heirs. It was unprecedented, scandalous, impossible, and yet it was happening. David looked down at the hatchlings walking beside him. "Well," he said softly, "I guess we're in this together now." Ash chirped in agreement. Smoke's tail wrapped around David's ankle. And despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty, David felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. 6 weeks had passed since David arrived at the royal palace. His quarters were larger than any apartment he had ever lived in back on Earth. The servants had adjusted everything for human needs, lowering the temperature to something survivable and bringing in furniture that didn't require climbing. But the most surprising thing was how routine it all became. Wake up, feed the hatchlings, spend the day teaching and playing, share a meal with various members of the household, sleep, repeat. Ash and Smoke grew rapidly. Now the size of large dogs, they could speak in simple sentences, mixing Draconis words with English. David stood in the training courtyard, watching Ash practice basic flying. The hatchling's wings were strong now, fully healed. She could manage short glides, though real flight was still weeks away. "Higher, Ash," David encouraged. "You've got this." Ash launched from the platform again, wings spreading wide. She glided 30 feet before landing with a tumble. Smoke applauded by clicking his claws together. A Draconis gesture David had learned meant approval. "That was beautiful," David said, helping Ash to her feet. "Tomorrow we'll try from the higher platform." "David makes learning fun," Ash said in her high voice. "Not like the tutors. They only teach rules and tradition." The royal tutors were a constant source of tension. They came each afternoon to teach the hatchlings about Draconis history, law, and customs. They taught in the old style, strict and formal. Ash and Smoke tolerated it, but they clearly preferred David's approach of learning through play and exploration. "Rules and tradition are important," David said, though he privately agreed with Ash. "You're going to be leaders someday. You need to know these things. But you teach us important things too," Smoke said, "like how to solve problems, and how to be kind." Before David could respond, Talia approached across the courtyard. She visited daily now, having appointed herself as David's guide to palace life. She was also the closest thing he had to a friend in this place. "The king requests your presence," Talia said. "Both you and the hatchlings." David felt his stomach tighten. Aldrich still made him nervous. They had spoken several times since the first meeting, always formal conversations about the hatchlings' progress. The king observed David from a distance, watching how he interacted with the children, but they had never had a real conversation. "Do you know what this is about?" David asked as they walked toward the king's private chambers. "Lord Victor has challenged your position," Talia said quietly. "He claims a human cannot properly raise Draconis heirs. He has demanded a trial." "What kind of trial?" 3 tests over 3 days. Strength, wisdom, and bond. It is traditional when a guardian's capability is questioned. David stopped walking. "I'm going to fight someone?" "Not exactly fight. You'll see." Talia put a hand on his shoulder. "Victor is a traditionalist. He believes only Draconis should raise Draconis. Many in the court agree with him. This trial will determine if you can stay." The king's chambers were less formal than the throne room, but no less impressive. High ceilings, walls covered in historical tapestries, a central fire pit that burned with controlled flames. Aldrich stood by a window, looking out over the volcanic landscape. He wore simple clothes, not his formal armor. Somehow he seemed even more imposing this way. Lord Victor stood nearby. He was huge, with dark purple scales and an expression of barely concealed contempt. David had seen him around the palace, always surrounded by other traditionalist nobles. "Your Majesty," David said, bowing. The hatchlings copied him, their bows much more graceful. Aldrich turned. His golden eyes moved from David to his children, and something softened in his expression. These past weeks, David had noticed the king watching them during their daily routines. Always from a distance, always alone. "Lord Victor has invoked the trial of guardianship," Aldrich said without preamble. "He believes you are unfit to raise my heirs." "I believe a human lacks the understanding of Draconis nature," Victor said. "The heirs require proper guidance in our ways. This human teaches them games and softness. He makes them weak. They're children," David said before he could stop himself. "They should play. They should have fun. They'll learn responsibility as they grow. See?" Victor gestured at David. "He treats royal heirs like common younglings. This is unacceptable." Aldrich raised a hand. "The trial will proceed as tradition demands." 3 tests. David Reed, you will compete against Lord Victor. The hatchling's preference will be the final measure, but all 3 tests carry weight in the judgment. "What if I lose?" David asked. "Then you will remain in the palace as a guest, but another guardian will be chosen for my heirs." Aldrich's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "The trial begins tomorrow at dawn." That night, David couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Ash and Smoke slept in their nests nearby. They had grown so much. They trusted him completely. The thought of being separated from them hurt more than he expected. "David?" Ash's small voice came from the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yeah, I'm awake." She padded over and climbed onto the bed. Smoke followed. They curled up on either side of him, warm and solid. "We don't want another guardian," Smoke said. "We want you." "I know, buddy. I want to stay too." "Then you will win," Ash said with the absolute certainty of a child. "You are the best guardian in the world." David hugged them both. "I'm going to try my hardest. I promise." Dawn came too quickly. The trial was held in the great arena, a massive circular space carved into the volcanic rock. The entire court attended, hundreds of Draconis filling the tiered seats. David stood in the center of the arena, feeling very small. Victor stood opposite him, confident and massive. Aldrich presided from a raised platform, with Ash and Smoke sitting on either side of him. The hatchlings looked worried. "The first test," Aldrich announced, his voice carrying across the arena. "Strength. Not of body, but of protection. The guardian must defend the young from danger." Gates opened at opposite ends of the arena. 2 creatures emerged, each the size of a bear. They looked like something between a wolf and a lizard, all teeth and claws and aggression. "Training beast," David realized. "Controlled but dangerous. You have 15 minutes, Aldrich said. "Protect the dummy hatchlings from the predators. Begin." Victor immediately charged his beast, meeting it head-on. He was magnificent, using his natural strength and scales to grapple with the creature. It was a display of raw power. David looked at his beast, then at the environment. The arena had various features: rocks, pillars, elevation changes. He couldn't fight the beast directly. He would lose, but he didn't need to fight it. He needed to protect the dummy. David grabbed the hatchling dummy and ran for the nearest pillar. He wedged himself and the dummy into a narrow space the beast couldn't reach. When it tried to circle around, David used a fallen pole to keep it at bay. He wasn't fighting. He was defending. The beast tried different approaches. David countered each one using terrain and strategy. He got scratched twice, but the dummy remained untouched. Victor defeated his beast in 10 minutes, roaring in triumph. But when the judges examined both scenarios, David's dummy was unharmed while Victor's had been torn during the fight. "The human wins the first test," Aldrich announced. "Protection, not combat, is the Guardian's first duty." Victor's face darkened with rage, but he said nothing. The second test came the next day. Wisdom. Both Guardians were given the same problem to solve. A hatchling had gotten stuck in a complicated puzzle trap. They had to talk the hatchling through escaping. Victor's approach was direct. He gave orders, expected obedience. The hatchling actor became confused and frightened. David's approach was different. He asked questions, helped the hatchling figure it out step by step. praised each small success. It took longer, but the hatchling emerged confident and happy. The human wins the second test, Aldrich said. A wise guardian teaches thinking, not just obedience, the court murmured. Some looked impressed. Others, like Victor, looked furious. The third test was the simplest and most important. The bond test. Both David and Victor were placed in separate rooms. Ash and Smoke were brought to the center of the arena and released. Go to the guardian you choose, Aldrich told them. David waited in his room, heart pounding. He could hear the crowd's reaction through the walls. Cheering, gasping. Then the door opened. Ash and Smoke rushed in, climbing all over him, chirping with joy. They had chosen him without hesitation. David hugged them tight, relief flooding through him. When they returned to the arena, Victor stood alone in his room, his face a mask of humiliation. The crowd was silent. Even the traditionalists couldn't argue with the hatchling's choice. Aldrich stood. The trial is complete. David Reed of Earth has proven himself through strategy, wisdom, and bond. He will remain as guardian to the royal heirs. This is my final judgment, the crowd erupted. Some cheered. Others protested. Victor stormed from the arena without a word. David just held Ash and Smoke, feeling like he could finally breathe again. That evening, as David was settling the hatchlings for bed, there was a knock on his door. He opened it to find Aldrich standing there alone. No guards, no ceremony. Your Majesty, David said, surprised. May I come in? Of course. Aldrich entered, having to duck through the doorway. He looked around the quarters, at the toys scattered on the floor, the drawings Ash had made stuck to the walls, the organized chaos of a home with children. You won today, Aldrich said. Not just the trial. You won my court's respect. Even those who doubted you must now acknowledge your capability. I just did what felt right. That is precisely why you succeeded. Aldrich moved to where Ash and Smoke slept. He stood over them, watching them breathe. I have been a poor father these past months. Grief consumed me. I could not bear to look at them without seeing what I had lost. They understand. They know you're hurting. They should not have to understand. They are children. They deserve a father who is present. Aldrich looked at David. You have shown me what that means. You are patient when I am stern, playful when I am serious. You give them what I cannot. You're learning. I've seen you with them. You're getting better. Because I watch you. You teach me as much as you teach them. Aldrich paused. Tomorrow I wish to join your daily routine. Not as king, but as their father. If you will allow it. David smiled. They would love that. So would I. Aldrich nodded and turned to leave. At the door he stopped. David Reed, you came to my world by accident. You disrupted everything. You challenged our traditions simply by being yourself. He looked back, and for the first time David saw warmth in those golden eyes. I am grateful you did. After the king left, David sat by the hatchlings' nests. Outside, the volcanic landscape glowed in the darkness. This strange world was becoming home. These impossible people were becoming family. He had thought he was just saving two injured creatures, but somehow in the process he had found something he never expected. He had found where he belonged. 3 months had transformed everything. Aldrich spent every morning with his children now, learning to play, to laugh, to be present. David watched the king slowly return to life, like a flower opening after a long winter. The grief was still there, visible in quiet moments, but it no longer controlled him. Ash and Smoke thrived. They were now the size of ponies, their scales brilliant and healthy. They flew confidently through the palace corridors, played elaborate games, and studied with enthusiasm that delighted their tutors. Most importantly, they had their father back. David stood on the training grounds watching Aldrich teach his children a traditional draconis flying technique. The king was patient, demonstrating each movement carefully. When Ash struggled with a turn, he adjusted her wing position with gentle claws. When Smoke succeeded, he roared approval that echoed off the mountains. They are happy, Talia said, joining David at the rail, more than any royal hatchlings in recent memory. The court speaks of it constantly. It's not me, David said. It's having their father present. That's what they needed all along. Do not diminish your role. You showed him how. Talia's expression grew serious. But there are concerns. Lord Victor's faction grows restless. They see the king's transformation as weakness. They whisper that human influence is corrupting our ways. Let them whisper. Aldrich makes his own choices. True, but whispers can become shouts. Be careful, David. That evening, David was helping Ash with her history homework when alarms blared through the palace. Not practice alarms, real ones. The kind that made his blood run cold. Aldrich burst into the room moments later, already armored. Get the hatchlings to the secure chamber, now. What's happening? Attack. The obsidian claw. They've breached the outer defenses. Aldrich's voice was hard, controlled fury. Go. Soren will escort you. David gathered Ash and Smoke. They were frightened, clinging to him as he rushed through the corridors. Soren appeared with a full squad of guards, weapons drawn. This way, she commanded. The secure chamber was deep in the palace, carved from solid rock. It was designed to withstand anything. As they descended, David could hear fighting above. Explosions. Roars of pain and rage. Who are the Obsidian Claw? David asked as Soren sealed the chamber door. Rebels. Led by Prince Draken, the king's cousin. He believes Aldrich is unfit to rule. He was behind the original kidnapping. Soren checked her weapon. They want the throne. The easiest path is eliminating the royal line. David's stomach dropped. They're after Ash and Smoke. They're after everyone. But yes, the heirs are primary targets. The chamber had monitoring screens showing various parts of the palace. David watched Aldrich fight, transformed to his full dragon form. He was magnificent and terrible. A force of nature made flesh. But there were so many attackers. They kept coming, hours passed. The fighting raged above. Ash and Smoke huddled against David, trying to be brave. He told them stories, sang songs, anything to keep them calm. But his eyes kept returning to the monitors. Then one of the screens showed something that made David's heart stop. A squad of Obsidian Claw soldiers had found the service tunnels. They were heading toward the secure chamber. Soren, David said quietly, not wanting to scare the hatchlings more. We have company coming. Soren looked at the monitor. Her expression hardened. They shouldn't know about those tunnels. Someone gave them information. She positioned her guards at the chamber entrance. If they breach the door, you take the hatchlings through the emergency exit. It leads to the lower caverns. Follow the marked path to the backup extraction point. What about you? I'll hold them as long as possible. That's what guards do. She looked at him. Protect them, David, no matter what. The sound of cutting tools echoed through the chamber. They were working on the door. Soren's guards formed a defensive line. David moved Ash and Smoke toward the emergency exit, trying not to let them see how scared he was. The door exploded inward. Smoke and flame filled the chamber. Through it came Obsidian Claw soldiers moving fast and coordinated. Soren met them with her own fury. The fighting was brutal and immediate. David ran with the hatchlings. The emergency tunnel was narrow and dark, lit only by bioluminescent fungus on the walls. Behind them, the sounds of fighting grew distant. Ahead, the path split into multiple directions. David checked the wall markings, following the symbols Soren had told him about. Left at the crystal formation. Right at the water flow. Down at the carved dragon head. The hatchlings were exhausted. Unable to fly in the confined space, David had to carry Smoke while Ash struggled to keep pace. They emerged into a larger cavern lit by lava flows, beautiful and terrifying. The heat was intense even for Draconis. David's suit struggled to compensate. Almost there, David encouraged, though he was exhausted himself. Just a little further, a shape dropped from above. A Draconis in dark armor, the mark of the obsidian claw on his chest. He had followed them through the tunnels. Give me the heirs, the soldier said. You can leave unharmed. We have no interest in humans. David put himself between the soldier and the hatchlings. Not happening. You cannot fight me. You are human, weak. Yeah, but I don't need to fight you. I just need to stop you. David grabbed a support pole from a nearby mining scaffold. He swung it at the soldier, not to win, but to buy time. The soldier laughed and knocked the pole away with ease. But David had learned from watching the Draconis. He had studied their culture, their tactics, their pride. He knew they valued honor in combat. They would never strike an opponent who was down. They considered it beneath them. David went down deliberately, covering Ash and Smoke with his body. You'll have to go through me, the soldier hesitated. Move aside, human. I will not kill you, but I will take what I came for. Then you'll have to kill me, because I'm not moving. They stared at each other. The soldier raised his weapon. David closed his eyes, holding the hatchlings tight. A roar shook the cavern. Something massive landed between David and the soldier. Aldrich, in full dragon form, his scales blackened with soot and blood. But alive, furious, the soldier turned to run. He didn't make it 3 steps before Aldrich's claws caught him. When it was over, Aldrich transformed back to humanoid form. He was injured, bleeding from multiple wounds. But his eyes were clear, focused on his children. "Father?" Ash and Smoke ran to him crying. He caught them, held them, his massive hands shaking. David stayed back, giving them space. Aldrich looked at him over his children's heads. The expression on the king's face was impossible to describe. Gratitude, respect, something deeper. "You protected them," Aldrich said quietly. "I told you I would. That first day I promised they would be safe. Even when it meant your death. Especially then." Later, after they had returned to the palace after the fighting had ended and the Obsidian Claw forces had been driven back, Aldrich called a gathering of the entire court. David stood before them, dirty and exhausted. Ash and Smoke refused to leave his side. The court filled the great hall, hundreds of Draconis watching in silence. "Today we were attacked by those who would destroy this kingdom," Aldrich began. "Many fought bravely. Many bled for their home. But I wish to speak of one in particular." He gestured to David. "This human who came to us by chance has proven himself beyond any doubt. He has shown courage, wisdom, and loyalty. When my children faced death, he stood between them and danger without hesitation. He was prepared to die for them," the court murmured. Even the traditionalists looked thoughtful. "Therefore I make this decree." Aldrich's voice rang through the hall. "David Reed of Earth is hereby adopted into the royal house. Not as servant or guardian alone, but as family. He will bear the title Guardian Consort of the Royal Flame. His word will carry weight in this court. His safety will be protected as one of our own." The court erupted in discussion. Some objected, more applauded. But Aldrich's word was law. "Furthermore," Aldrich continued, "he will undergo the Flame Gate ceremony at the next moon. Let no one question his place among us again." After the gathering, David found himself alone with Aldrich in the king's private chambers. The wounds on Aldrich's body were already healing, but he moved stiffly. "The Flame Gate," David said. "Talia told me about it. It's a ceremonial fire that tests worthiness." "Yes. It's meant to be symbolic for Draconis. Your scales protect you. But I'm human. It will actually burn me." "I know." Aldrich poured 2 cups of wine, handed one to David. "You have the right to refuse. No one would fault you." "What would refusing mean?" "You could remain here. Keep your role with my children." "But you would not be family." "Not truly. You would always be the outsider." David sipped the wine. It was strong, spicy, warming. "And if I walk through the fire?" "Then you become Draconis in all but blood. You become my brother. In the eyes of our people, you become permanent family to Ash and Smoke." "That's what you want?" Aldrich looked at him steadily. "When my mate died, I thought I would never feel whole again. These past months you have shown me I was wrong. You brought my children back to me. You brought me back to myself. You are already family in my heart, David Reed. The ceremony would simply make it official." David thought about his old life, the loneliness, the drifting, the feeling that he didn't belong anywhere. He thought about Ash and Smoke sleeping peacefully in their nests because they knew he was near. He thought about mornings spent with Aldrich, teaching each other about their different worlds. "When is the ceremony?" David asked. 3 days. Then I'll walk through the fire." Aldrich smiled, really smiled, for the first time since David had met him. "You are braver than you know, or dumber, still trying to figure out which." They sat together as the sun set over the volcanic landscape, drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing. Outside, the palace was being repaired. The wounded were being tended. Life continued, and David realized he was no longer afraid of what came next. He had found something worth any risk. He had found home. The Flame Gate stood in the ancient ceremonial chamber, carved from volcanic rock thousands of years ago. It was an archway 12 feet high, surrounded by channels of controlled fire. For Draconis, walking through was a symbolic gesture. For David, it would be very real pain. The entire court gathered to witness. Tradition demanded public ceremony for anyone joining the royal house. David stood at the entrance in ceremonial robes that offered no protection from heat. His hands shook, but he kept them at his sides. Aldrich stood before the gate in his formal armor, the king presiding over his own family's expansion. Ash and Smoke sat in places of honor, wearing small ceremonial garments. They looked worried but proud. David Reed of Earth. Aldrich's voice echoed through the chamber. You have been called to join the royal house. To accept this honor, you must prove your worth by walking the path of flame. Do you accept this trial? David's mouth was dry, but his voice was steady. I accept. Then let the ceremony begin. The flames in the channels roared higher. The temperature in the chamber soared. David could feel the heat even from 30 feet away. He thought about running, about admitting this was insane, about finding some excuse to back out. Then he looked at ash and smoke, at Aldrich, at Talia and the others who had become friends, at this strange world that had somehow become home. David walked forward. Each step brought him closer to the flames. The heat became painful. His skin felt like it was cooking. 10 feet from the gate, every instinct screamed at him to stop. He kept walking. Through the gate, into the fire, pain exploded across every nerve. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only keep moving forward one step at a time because stopping meant failing and failing meant losing everything. 3 steps through the flames felt like forever. His vision blurred. His legs threatened to give out. Then he was through, collapsing on the other side. His skin was red and blistered. The pain was incredible. Aldrich caught him before he hit the ground. Foolish human, the king said, but his voice was gentle. You could have died. Had to do it, David gasped. Had to show them I belong. Medical staff rushed forward with special ointments designed for burn treatment. They worked quickly, covering David's injuries. The medicine worked fast, the pain already diminishing. Draconis medical technology was incredibly advanced. When David could stand again, Aldrich placed a hand on his shoulder. By the old laws and the fire's judgment, I declare David Reed a member of the royal house. He is guardian consort of the royal flame. He is brother to the king. He is family. The court responded with traditional approval. Even the traditionalists couldn't argue now. David had literally walked through fire to earn his place. Ash and smoke rushed to him the moment protocol allowed, careful of his injuries. You were so brave, Ash said, tears in her eyes. I was terrified, David admitted. But you're worth it. The celebration lasted 3 days. David's burns healed completely thanks to Draconis medicine. During that time, representatives from Earth arrived. An official delegation, sent after hearing about a human being adopted into alien royalty. The meeting was held in a private chamber. Ambassador Patricia Foster was a sharp woman in her 50s who didn't waste time with pleasantries. You've created quite a situation, Mr. Reed, she said. Earth's government is very interested in your position here. I didn't create anything. I just tried to help some injured creatures. And now you're nobility in the most powerful empire in this sector. You have influence, access to the king himself. Earth would like you to use that influence to benefit humanity. David felt exhaustion settle over him. Of course, Earth wanted something from him. I'm not a spy or a politician, he said. I'm just trying to take care of 2 kids who needed someone. You're much more than that now. You're a bridge between our species. You could help establish trade agreements, technology exchanges, military alliances. Or I could just be a person who cares about his family. Did you consider that? Ambassador Foster frowned. You have a responsibility to your homeworld. I had a responsibility to 2 injured hatchlings. I fulfilled it. Everything else just happened. David stood. I'm not going to use my relationship with this family for political gain. If Earth wants treaties with the Draconis, they can negotiate them properly. Leave my family out of it. The government won't be pleased. That's their problem, not mine. After the ambassador left, David found Aldrich watching the sunset from his private balcony. The king looked thoughtful. Your people want you to spy on us, Aldrich said. It wasn't a question. They want me to be useful to them. I refused. Why? You are human. Your loyalty should be to your kind. My loyalty is to the people I care about. Species doesn't change that. David joined him at the rail. Does it bother you? That I'm human? That I'll never be Draconis no matter how many fires I walk through? Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. When I lost my mate, I thought I understood loss completely. Then my children were taken and I learned there are depths to pain I never imagined. When you brought them back, when you showed me how to be their father again, you gave me something I cannot repay. You don't need to repay anything. You are human, Aldrich continued. Your life will be shorter than mine. Than my children's. That pain is coming, the loss of you, I know it. But I have learned that love is worth the eventual grief. My mate taught me that. You have reminded me of it. David felt his throat tighten. I'm not planning to go anywhere anytime soon. Good, my children need you. I need you. Aldrich looked at him. You are family, David Reed, in every way that matters. 5 years passed. Ash and Smoke grew into adolescence, already showing signs of the leaders they would become. They were different from traditional Draconis royalty. More open, more curious, more willing to question tradition. They had learned those traits from watching David. David established a school in the palace that taught both Draconis and human children. Cultural exchange programs brought species together. The Draconis Imperium slowly opened to the galaxy, moving away from isolation. David became one of Aldrich's most trusted advisors, though he never sought the role. He spoke his mind honestly, offered perspectives no Draconis would consider, and wasn't afraid to tell the king when he was wrong. Aldrich valued that more than he could express. The Obsidian Claw was defeated. Prince Draken captured and imprisoned. The kingdom was stable and prosperous. Peace settled over Paraxis like a warm blanket. One evening, David sat in the palace gardens watching Ash and Smoke practice aerial maneuvers with their father. They were magnificent, moving through the sky with grace and power. They had grown so much from the tiny injured creatures he had found in that abandoned station. Talia joined him on the bench. She was head of his personal guard now, but more importantly, his closest friend. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Everything you gave up to be here? David thought about his old life. The loneliness, the debt, the feeling of being adrift with no real purpose or connection. I didn't give up anything important, he said. I gained everything that matters. Your people still send requests. They want you to return, to be their representative. Let them request. This is my home. Aldrich landed nearby, transforming to his humanoid form. Ash and Smoke tumbled after him, play-fighting in the grass. The king sat beside David, watching his children with obvious affection. They want to start diplomatic training next year, Aldrich said. Meeting with other species, learning treaty negotiation. They're ready, David agreed. They're smart, compassionate, and they understand that strength doesn't mean domination. They learned that from you. They learned it from watching you become the father they needed. Ash looked over and called out, David, father, come fly with us. I can't fly, remember? David called back. Father can carry you. He has before, it was true. Sometimes Aldrich would transform and let David ride on his back, soaring over the volcanic landscape. The first time had been terrifying. Now it was one of David's favorite things. What do you say? Aldrich asked. Shall we indulge them? David grinned. Let's go. As Aldrich transformed and David climbed onto his back as they launched into the air with Ash and Smoke flying alongside them, David thought about how impossible this all was. A human, adopted into alien royalty, a grieving king who learned to love again, 2 hatchlings who became the bridge between old traditions and new possibilities. He had thought he was just saving 2 injured creatures. He had been performing a simple act of compassion without expecting anything in return. He couldn't have known it would change his entire life, would give him family and purpose and a home among the stars. But maybe that was how the best things happened. Not through grand plans or careful strategy, but through small moments of kindness that rippled outward in ways no one could predict. Below them, the palace lights began to glow as the sun set. The volcanic landscape painted itself in shades of orange and red. Ash and Smoke raced each other through the clouds, their laughter carrying on the wind. Aldrich flew steady and sure with David secure on his back. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Some things were understood without words. Family was family, whether bound by blood or by choice. Love was love, whether between the same species or different ones. David had spent years feeling lost, searching for something he couldn't name. He had found it in the most unlikely place in the most unexpected way. Not in his own world, but in another. Not with his own kind, but with beings who should have been alien to him but instead became the most important people in his life. The Dragon King had given him a gift more valuable than anything he could have imagined. Not wealth or power or fame, but belonging, family, home. And in return, David had given the same. It was, he thought as they flew through the darkening sky, a fair exchange. The best exchange he ever made. Years later, when scholars studied this period of Draconis history, they would mark it as a turning point. The moment when an ancient empire began to evolve, to open, to embrace change. They would write about the guardian consort who bridged 2 species and helped heal a grieving king. But David never cared about legacy or history books. He cared about morning flights with his family, about teaching Ash and Smoke to question everything, about quiet evenings with Aldrich, two beings from different worlds who had found common ground in love and loss and hope. He cared about the small moments that made life worth living, the ones that couldn't be measured or recorded, but that mattered more than anything else. He had saved 2 hatchlings. They had saved him right back. And that, David thought as he watched Ash and Smoke race toward home, was the real story. Not one of great deeds or epic adventures, but of connection, of family, of love that transcended every boundary that should have kept them apart. He smiled as they landed in the palace courtyard, as Ash and Smoke tumbled over each other in their haste to tell him about their flight, as Aldrich transformed and laughed at his children's enthusiasm. This was home. This was family. This was everything. And David wouldn't change a single moment of it.